I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to give you my response to the Confessions of St. Augustine. Lord, make me good but not yet. While not his own words, the phrase often attributed to St. Augustine captures his carnal struggle well. Augustine early on was a man of the world. As a boy and a young man, he gave in to his bodily drives and urges. Born in 354 CE in Tagaste in northern Africa, his father was a non-believer, though his mother, Monica, was a devout Christian. But while he observed her ways, he did not learn much from her about the Christian religion. He was acquainted with the religions of his day, though he was not a believer from the start. He indulged in the ways of the world, he revelled, he participated in their equivalent of the rat race, wanting to earn money and become well-to-do. Augustine tells us his story in his Confessions, one of the early instances of autobiographical writing. His book is an extended prayer about 400 pages long, where he is communicating to two intended audiences. He was hopeful that he will find human readers, but primarily the main person being addressed is God. It reads like a long conversation with God where he recounts and reflects on his life from the vantage point of a middle-aged man who has found God. So it is not a story that is unfolding, but one that has already unfolded and now examined through the eyes of one who is wiser. Because he is now wiser, he is contrite. It is a confession not because he has to tell God what God already knows, since God knows everything. In confessing, he is communing with God. It is him thinking aloud, trying to understand firstly his own life and then also the mysteries of existence. Because his interlocutor is God, Augustine knows he cannot hide anything, and so the Confessions is a bare-all account of his life, which is what makes it such a compelling book. The language is not hard-going, at least in translation, but it is not a difficult read primarily because many readers will recognize themselves in his account. Like him, they too have struggled to be good and failed, and have wondered about things and failed to find the answers. Not all will be able to find where Augustine has found his solution, that is, in his faith, at least not yet. But in the Confessions, the life of a saint is demystified. He is very much like an ordinary person in the sense that he too is troubled by his life, where he feels uneasy because he feels that there is something wrong with the way he is conducting his existence. And it was not as if he had from the start already believed in God. He had to go through his journey where he finally found what he was looking for. Augustine tried many things. He tried to put his faith in the world, where he gave in to his primal animal instincts to indulge in sensual pleasures. He frequented prostitutes. He lived with an unnamed woman and even had a son with her out of wedlock. When he was a boy, he stole pears with his friends from a plantation. He tells us that it was not as if he lacked for food and hence stole out of necessity. He had better quality pears at home, and he hardly even ate the ones he stole, taking a bite out of some and then just throwing them away. It was out of mischief in the company of his friends that he did it, a mix of unwarranted malice and peer pressure. With his education and his ability to persuade and argue, he taught young men the art of rhetoric for use in the courts of law. He understood how ornate speech and warped yet convincing argumentation can lead to an abortion of justice, but he put any such mores aside, making him an enabler of injustice. His students at Carthage were mischievous, and so he went to Rome in hope of an easier-to-control group, only to find out that the students in Rome were worse in one respect, where they ran away without paying their fees. However, this was not a dissolute man, completely devoid of morals. As a young man, he encountered Cicero's Hortensius, which unfortunately is no longer extant. It inspired in him a desire for the truth, to understand what life is about, in short, to philosophize. He began to despise the literature he had learned in school, which taught him language skills but polluted the minds of its students with stories of dubious moral values. He threw in his lot with the Manichaeans, a popular religion then who believed that both good and evil are fundamental forces in the world, that both were there from the beginning. As he learned more and more about their doctrine, he felt disappointment and disbelief, but yet he did not tear himself away from them, since he did not find a better alternative doctrine to believe in. He stayed with them for 9 years. He studied astrology, but found that its successful predictions were just a matter of chance. Manichaeism, astrology, and such cultic systems were unable to satisfy him intellectually. He sees reasoning and logical flaws in them, and yet can find no one to explain to him why he was wrong. He met a purported expert, Faustus, who was supposed to be able to help him overcome his doubts, but he found the man lacking in intellect, just another smooth and charismatic talker who does not possess what he was looking for, the substance of knowledge and truth. His mom had accompanied him to Rome, afraid to lose him, but he finally snuck away to Milan. There he landed an academic position, becoming a professor. It was in Milan that he finally met his master, a teacher who could help him towards the light of truth and knowledge, Bishop Ambrose. One thing that is important to realize is that the Confessions is not some kind of simplistic narrative like a fairy tale, where one thing leads to another progressively and finally deliver a happy ending. It is very much a story of real life, where things go back and forth, where there are missed opportunities, misunderstandings and prejudices, spanners thrown in here and there, but all of these are part of his journey also, even if some led to dead ends. He will suffer. His close friends passes away. He is made to leave his lover because he was betrothed to another in a better marriage which fell through. Later his son dies. His mother dies. His struggle with his carnal desires continues. Augustine refers to the biblical parable of the prodigal son several times in the work. The prodigal son has to go away in order for him to realize what is good for him. It is a part of his life's journey. If he never ran away and saw the world, he will not be able to appreciate how great his father's house is. Likewise, Augustine had to experience, struggle and suffer in order to arrive at his discovery. The key discovery that Augustine makes in Milan and in his time with Ambrose is that he had a fundamental misunderstanding of the metaphysics of the divine. He understood that God is infinite and eternal, and yet it boggles his mind, how could that possibly be, since an infinite being would be in everything, and yet it suggests that a bigger animal will have more God in it than a smaller one. Essentially, his understanding of reality is so mired in the materialist paradigm that he was unable to conceive how there is also the existence of the immaterial, which, being immaterial, does not have to obey the limitations of space and time. This is an important intellectual breakthrough for Augustine, paving the way for him to have a new understanding of the Bible, which had earlier repulsed him with its seeming incoherence. Neoplatonist ideas help clarify some of these aspects to him, though he notes its deficiency of not being in line with the Bible. However, knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing. He has had the knowledge of what is good and what he should do for a long time now, but lacked the wisdom to actually carry it out. He continued to struggle, but previously, when he knew intellectually the right things to do but was not ready to do them, now he was ready. In a defining episode in his garden, he implored God to now make him good. He was finally ready. He tells us of the bitter tears he shed, as he now sincerely wants to become pure, to become good, when he heard a voice who repeated, "Pick it up and read." He opened the Bible at random and took as a personal message what his eyes happened to fall on. It told him to put on the Lord Jesus Christ. It was his moment of illumination, of enlightenment. It became his solution to the lure of all his carnal desires, to rely on God such that these desires fall away from him. He converts to Christianity, renounces his career, and is baptized. He finds his confidence in God, who gives him peace and security. The last 4 books of his Confessions are philosophical. He considers the nature of memory and of the 5 senses. Dwelling only on the first verse of the Bible in the book of Genesis, he reasons that time did not exist prior to God deciding to make heaven and earth, that the very concept of time was not there, since how can there be time if there was no change, the way that God is changeless? Change and time only arrived with the material world. He adopts Aristotle's theory of hylomorphosis without citing him, where prime matter must first have been made by God, after which form is also given to it, to form the multitude of things in the world. He figured that God must have created the material of his creation ex nihilo, since otherwise God will have to use material from his divine self, which will make the creation equal to himself, the way that is the case for the Trinity. He tries to explain the mystery of the Trinity. His method is one of a reasoned deduction, though his premises are by no means certain, themselves a reasoned deduction from his interpretation of the Bible. He considers why Moses had written Genesis in such a way that leaves it open to interpretation. He figures that language is not up to the task of expressing something so beyond our understanding, such that there can be different interpretations, and how the various interpretations may all be correct if they do not contradict, of how the wisdom of the author who is led by God to write, as such, may be expressing in brief lines a lot. These chapters are heavily theological and philosophical. That God can only create what is good, and yet the reason why there is evil in the world is because evil is a privation of good, once again drawing on Aristotle, that is our sinful nature that causes this privation, and hence how we have moral responsibility for our deeds. Many of these ideas are still influential in today's philosophy. For instance, how his notion of memory and time can be found in Henri Bergson, ideas such as how the insufficiency of language and its concepts influence how we understand the world. He tries to unravel these mysteries to the extent that he is able to, based on his knowledge and understanding, but submits that to the extent that it is possible, it is only through God's allowance, through God's grace. He is not dogmatic. His approach is sincere, one of trying as best he could to think about these mysteries, but he makes no declaration that he must be right, unlike the Manichaeans whom he have now come to detest. It is not as if all becomes clear. Augustine poses many questions in these chapters, but he does not find complete resolution. He accepts that there remains much that we cannot understand and may never be able to understand. From the text, it is also not clear if his struggle with the carnal side of himself is once and for all resolved. I do not know why it would be so, since he remains human. But what has changed from his previous struggles is that he is able now to rest confident in God, in God's provision and grace. His surrender is what liberates him from the shackles of bodily desires, fears, and mortal death. His self-control comes not from his own strength, but from what he knows and feels he can rely on. How does this work apply to me since I'm an atheist? Though I'm acquainted with Christianity since young, as well as the doctrine of several other major religions later, I've come to my own atheistic conclusions. So I am unable to fall back on the comfort of thinking that there is a benevolent God who cares about me. I am not, however, dismissive of people's religious beliefs. I am with the pragmatists on this. Keep doing whatever works for you. I have, however, been gravitating to the notion that we are spiritual beings, material beings that also have an immaterial spirit within us. I do not exclude the possibility that our spirits can commune with the universe. that the universe might also be a spiritual being. Like Augustine, it had been a journey, an intellectual and existential journey that has brought me to this position, though I'm unfortunately not as far along as him in my spiritual realizations. I have never had a convincing mystical experience. I never had visions or heard voices hailing from the divine. I might almost be too rationalistic for my own good, though rationalism does not equate to an exclusion of the possibility of spirit, human or divine. It might in fact be rather rational to believe, as Blaise Pascal has pointed out in his wager, though to believe under such rationalization seems to be a case of bad faith. But as Augustine and Alcoholics Anonymous tell us, we must first think we have a problem, to feel uneasy over the way we have been living. Perhaps by today's standards, or even the standards of his day, what Augustine wrote about as immoral may for others seem rather normal, or even if wrong, trivial. He went so far as to think later in his life that even sex in marriage sullies the self. What we do know is that he felt those things were wrong. Instead, Augustine could have felt that fulfilling his bodily desires is simply natural, and hence that restraint is unnecessary. He could have felt that teaching his students to speak brilliantly but dishonestly is perfectly fine, so long as it is profitable. He could have put profits above all else and engaged in the rat race with relish. In fact, many people do. It is quite the norm, seemingly in his day and certainly in ours. However, he found these problematic and hence was in search for a solution. He found his salvation in the Christian God. If the doctrine of Christianity did not satisfy him, the way Manichaeism and astrology did not, it seems likely he would have continued searching. It was not as if he knew nothing about Christianity up to the point of conversion, but before that time, he was not ready. He was still searching and struggling. He was still lacking self-control and still trying to make sense of the world. If he had not met Ambrose, would he ever have found Christ? I imagine the church would reply in the affirmative, since they will claim that it is by God's grace that Augustine came across Ambrose, and hence, if not Ambrose, then some other person or way that will lead Augustine to his realization. Elsewhere, Augustine has a theory of illumination, where a teacher can only guide her students' inner light towards realizing the truth that has always been within them. If it was not already within them, then there would be nothing for her to be guiding them towards. Augustine's example can be an inspiration for us to keep seeking, to know that even the best among us are plagued with carnal urges, that the struggle is real. In any case, if we want to find, we have to keep searching, or minimally be open to possibilities. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.